us for another virtual lunch and learn. Today's topic for the scams that we're covering over the course of our series is charity scams. Now, charity scams aren't as one of the more well-known types of scams out there. Most people have heard of the phone scams, the phishing emails, or scams that are related to romance or things like that. However, charity scams are a lot more subtle, and they're definitely one of the up-and-coming scams that we're starting to see um, coming up with our members and the community as large. So, what are charity scams? Well, charity scams are taking advantage of your kindness. They recognize that most of us are really generous, kind people, and we want to be helping people that are in crisis or that are really struggling. And a lot of us, when we do have extra funds, we want to use that to make our community a better place to live or to support those in need. And they're taking advantage of that kindness. Also, giving and donating has changed a lot in the last 10 years with the changes in technology and especially since COVID. So now you'll be running into GoFundMe's or funeral fundmes or other types of crowdfunding websites coming up on your social media, asking for donations through payment apps like Venmo or Cash App. And there's a lot more natural disasters and crises happening. Seems like we're having a lot more of those happening on a frequent basis, whether it's earthquakes or hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding or anything like that, as well as we're seeing a lot more conflict on a national and global level. So there are people in crisis in that way too. And those are more opportunities for those scammers to try to take advantage of your kindness for others. So some examples of this. A recent example has been the conflict with Palestine and Israel. As you can see here are two different emails asking for support for Israel or support for Palestine. All of it is looking to take advantage of your kindness, and they really move fast. So they start sending out these scam emails, scam phone calls, scam social media posts. They start as soon as the crisis is happening and try to impersonate a legitimate nonprofit, whether it is an independent nonprofit or a nationally recognized one. They really want to take advantage of your kindness and or use the urgency of our national news to be able to get you to make that donation without thinking about where it's going. So, why are scammers targeting charity? Oftentimes, there's a lot of pressure to respond quickly. After a tornado, after an earthquake, it's definitely something where people are in crisis and they need that financial support right now. Um, there's also a lot of urgency in the news and media about what's going on. And you might not be familiar with what local organizations, especially if it's overseas or in a community that you're not familiar with, they might pose as a charity in that area when they actually aren't. Or they might impersonate nationally known organizations like Salvation Army to try to get your trust. And finally, the number one thing scammers are looking for is that money. And obviously, money is a big thing with US charities. An estimated nearly $500 billion was donated through individuals, bequests, foundations, and corporations in the United States to charities in 2022 alone. And that's only continues to grow. So it's definitely a market that these scammers want to get into and to start taking funds from. So this is an example. It's a little bit of an older one, but it covers talking about impersonation of the American Red Cross. Most of us are very well aware of them. They're a very prominent agency here in the United States for providing support after disaster, and definitely is something to be supportive of. However, there's some things when taking a look at this email that can be some red flags. So first of all, it says American National Red Cross, which is a legitimate kind of thing to have. But when you look into the actual email address, it says Red Cross donation at redcross.org. Now, a lot of times they'll spoof an email or spoof a website to try to get you to make that donation. And then at the bottom, they have donate right now online. Simply click here to donate any amount you wish. And the hyperlink or the link in the email goes to a personal PayPal account. They might have the logo for American Red Cross on there, but it's not the official Red Cross email address or PayPal account. And that's something to be mindful of when you're looking at making those online payments. A lot of times, national charities will have those types of payment options. However, it's always good to just trust but verify that that is their actual payment process before you put in your credit card information. The next thing to cover is GoFundMe's. This is a funeral GoFundMe example. GoFundMe's are a very popular way right now for people to get support, whether it's for a medical emergency or for a funeral or after a disaster, to get support from people across their community or across the world. Now, these can be very helpful for people in crisis who need that extra support. However, it's one of those things that can easily be faked by a scammer, especially after a crisis. Oftentimes, they'll look for mass shootings or other disasters, and they'll pick photos of or names of people out of press releases and create fake GoFundMe's for that person and pretend to be a family member or a neighbor collecting funds for that person. And this one here in the slide, it's a memorial for someone, and it's by Raymond Hamilton. The fishy, that's a different kind of name. But this person was actually a scammer and created this using somebody else's photo from a obituary, kind of stole some information from the obituary and made his own GoFundMe and raised over $21,000. And that is $21,000 that is not going to the family of this person. So it's definitely something to be aware of who is actually receiving the funds from that GoFundMe. Do you know them? That's my number one recommendation with GoFundMe's is either have a 2-degree connection to that person. If you do not know the person who is receiving the funds directly, and it's somebody that's been shared by a family member or friend, especially on social media, ask that person how they're connected to them. We know that a lot of times communities share these types of things. It's better to just verify that this is a legitimate page or the legitimate person before you donate. So, what can we do to be mindful of those charity scams? Just be watchful of when you're online giving, looking at those payment portals, if the logos look weird or if there's information that's not really necessary to give, feel that's a little bit of a red flag. You can also ask questions. This is especially good if you have somebody come up to you or give you a call and be like, hey, I'm with the Police Benevolence Association of Wisconsin or something like that, that you're like, not quite sure about this. Ask them how the funds are used. Are they going directly to people? Is there administrative costs? It is kind of a red flag when somebody says, oh, 100% goes to the people we serve. Every organization has overhead costs, whether it's 10 cents to $1 or whatever that is. If they're saying 100% goes to the people in need, that might be a little bit of a red flag. And also, how are they connected to those in need? Do they actually work with them? Are they just sending money to local agencies? How does that work? You can also check to see if they're a registered 501c3. That's how the IRS categorizes national nonprofits. And then, like I said before, the crowdfunding. Do you really know them? Do the people that you've shared that with or have seen that from, do you know them? You can also donate directly and say, hey, I don't really feel comfortable donating to GoFundMe. Do you have a local bank that I can go to or a credit union and have an account there that I can drop that donation at and find that support that way? You can also do research on the charity online. I highly recommend guidestar.org and Charity Navigator. Charity Navigator, particularly for international and national disasters, is a really helpful resource. They have a page called Where to Give Now, and anytime there's a crisis, whether it is a natural disaster or otherwise, they have a full page on their website about that specific event and registered charities that they trust and verify that will benefit the people in that community. It's a really great way that if it's overseas or somewhere out of state and you're like, I don't really know the area, but I want to give and support them, that's a great way to give to an agency that you know is going to be helping and doing good. And finally, to prevent, especially this is coming up with things that are local when you're seeing those GoFundMes and things, doing volunteering. You don't have to spend any money to help our nonprofits in our community if you're volunteering, doing that research ahead of time and knowing what causes you value. Do you value pets and animal care? Do you value children and childcare? Or do you value health related stuff or rebuilding? Whatever it is, get your values kind of figured out ahead of time. So when a disaster or something comes up, you know what type of charity or you know who you're going to donate to before you let your emotions sweep you away. And finally, encourage yourself and the people around you to create an emergency fund. As much as GoFundMe's and that are really helpful when you're trying to have those big medical costs or funeral expenses, it's even more helpful to have an emergency fund in place. So that way, when those unexpected expenses come up, you don't necessarily have to turn to GoFundMe first. You have some extra reserves before you have to go that route. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us, and you will be continuing this presentation in the next couple of weeks.